Does it say we're recording?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, good morning, Mike and Maleika. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourselves, and then we can talk into some of these issues we're seeing on the markets right now?
Go ahead, Maleika.
I'm Maleika Bordigioni. I am a research manager with the FAPRI project and University Center for Economic Development at University of Nevada, Reno.
And I'm Mike Helmar. I'm also a research manager. I'm with the Agricultural Experiment Station and the University Center for Economic Development, again with Maleika with the FAPRI project at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Great. Well, thank you to you both for tuning in this morning. And, I know we're trying to get a lot of timely and important information out to people in very uncertain times. So what can you talk about today that, that folks need to know about?
Well, there's some price volatility going on, particularly in the cattle markets right now. They had really dropped by about 25% at the low point, but then at the end of last week, they had come back up to about only a 10 to 15% down. Now, early this week, they're dropping again. They've dropped another $8 to $10 per hundredweight just since the end of last week, as we're looking at it. And they're now not down to as low as they were before, but they are low. Having said that, if we start looking at the slaughter numbers this week, they're holding steady. Particularly if you compare to them a year ago, we're at about the same slaughter levels. So the demand for that beef is for those cattle and beef is still up. The people are hoarding meat a little bit to a certain extent now. We're seeing that in the stores, but that demand is only holding there at much lower prices. So the cattle prices, even though had a short-term recovery, have fallen back again.
Okay. So that's cautiously some good news then. I mean, demand is staying relatively stable, it sounds like.
Yes, but it takes a lower price for that to occur.
Okay, gotcha. What else are you seeing? Maybe compared with some of the numbers we talked about last week.
Yeah. Milk prices we talked about, and that was an area of concern that they are off by about $3 per hundredweight from basically the beginning of the year. And they've flattened out now. They're only off by, a few cents from where they were last week. So milk prices have stabilized. Having said that, margins for producers, I assume, are down. We're seeing growth in prices. Hay prices are back up a little bit as of last week. So I don't think the producer margins I don't think that the feed costs have dropped enough to maintain producer margins. So milk producers are still kind of toughing it out. If we look at wool prices, another important commodity for Nevada, this week they've stabilized. Reading some of the Australian news, who basically dominate the global wool markets, their prices have stabilized from last week after several weeks of pretty significant drops. Those wool prices have stabilized now, which is good news for Nevada producers. Plus, we have to add on to that, if we look at the exchange rate movements between the Australian dollar and the US dollar in the last week, the Australian dollar has strengthened relative to the US dollar. So that means a stable price in Australian dollars translates into a slightly higher price in US dollars. So even though the prices are down, American wool producers are not seeing a further deterioration and may actually be seeing a very small recovery. Probably not enough to make them whole, but that's stabilized as well.
Okay, very good. Anything else you want to add that we can talk about today?
As a matter of fact, just a few minutes ago or within the last hour, the annual USDA Prospective Plantings Report comes out, and that's always on the last day of March every year, and that's where they have surveyed producers across the country for various crops about what they intend to plant this year. And we are seeing that even though prices are down, for example, major feed commodities like corn, soybeans that goes into the meal and oil, they expect to see a significant increase in the plantings of those this year. Things like wheat, are about stable from last year. Cotton about stable. Now, I know we're not concerned that much directly with cotton in Nevada, but one of the other interesting things that they have in that report every year is it's not hay plantings, but the expected hay harvesting acres. And last year we saw a considerable recovery in harvested acres of hay, both grass hay and alfalfa in Nevada. This year the expectations are that will be maintained and maybe even increased by about 1%. I mean, that's too small of a percentage for us to really hang much of a hat on. But the indications are that hay producers are going to maintain their production this year, we hope. Given that we have, even though we're down a little bit on moisture, we've got adequate surface water because we had a lot stored up in the last few years, that hay production should be able to be maintained. All alfalfa hay in Nevada is irrigated. There should be the water for that, so our hay production should be able to be maintained this year, which will be good for our dairy producers and for winter feeding for cattle, particularly in the northern part of the state.
See that?
Hey, Tom, we're recording. Hi.
Hello. I'm with my wife in the car.
Do you have anything to add regarding projections for ag and our economy right now?
No, what's going on is going to be quite interesting. Like, there's a lot of things changing. April 1 is going to be an interesting thing for the whole economy, the supply chains and other things. But I would refer back to Maleika and Mike on the detailed agricultural impacts.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I heard him talk about Russia. Russia is having some problems. The interesting thing in the Wall Street, there's 6 strains of this thing in the U.S. The eight, and the one in the West Coast is different from the one on the East Coast. And the one on the West Coast just mutated, about 3 or 4 days ago?
3 times.
3 times already. So this is, I'm not a scientist, but just how evasive this thing is.
Right.
To that point, Tom, I was listening to a report yesterday about the mutations, and the research doctor said that yes, it mutates, and it has mutated in this country. The differences between the strains still aren't that significant that we have a whole new critter here. So
Yep.
If we can effectively treat one, we could effectively treat the others. Having said that, vaccines are still a year away. They're trying the inoculations from people who have recovered from the disease to see if that will help in the short term.
True.
But
I think
it's still up in the air.
You're absolutely right on that. It's a combination of science and economics, and as soon as we get that thing under control, then we can proceed.
Exactly.
Kind of like polio.
Mike, we talked last week about how some industries are just going to keep plugging along regardless, while others are just getting pummeled. Are you starting to see that play out in the markets a little bit?
I don't, and Maleika, you may have kept as much tabs on this as I have, but I don't see that we're adding to the list of industries affected. I think we already had a pretty comprehensive list. It seems like, and it's different, it's different from state to state, actually. Here in the West in Nevada, we've got some retail that we don't deem as being essential are closed. However, as talking with my son in the state of Delaware, the governor has deemed liquor stores to be essential for help with people who have alcoholism and addictions, that we may be able to continue to feed that so that they don't go off the deep end. That's just kind of an extreme example, I believe. But in that, I don't know that we've really added too much to the list of non-essential industries. Have you heard anything, Maleika?
No, I think the sectors that are getting hit the hardest are for sure the tourism and tourism-related sectors, hotels, retail, restaurants, and airlines, anything associated with travel. But I think that has been pretty consistent throughout. And I agree that there's quite a bit of variance state to state. and how they're addressing those particular industries. For example, in some states, restaurants are able to stay open for takeout only, while other states, I think they've tried to close the restaurants down, or maybe even the type of restaurants that can operate. So I think it's just time will tell. We saw the first unemployment report come out last week, and it was over 3 million. Is that correct? And they expect that to expand greatly. That was just our first reporting since this COVID started.
Are you referring to the initial claims for unemployment
Yes,
insurance?
yes, yes,
That was well over 3 million. Yes.
yes. Wait,
There was,
well over
there,
3
there,
million.
there's a bank this today came out with 30. It's because we can't model this thing. Really, there's a bank that said 30% unemployment, but it's interesting. The Federal Reserve in St. Louis is not so much businesses, is occupations. If you and I, this group we have right here, we can operate off. We know how to do computers and offline, but a 21 dealer has to be person to person. Those people, those occupations are going to be really hurt. Some occupations can go between sectors, but you're right. The accommodation and food sector, okay, our gaming will be internet, but I don't know how much internet business there is. And it's not in Dottie's and these things. So there are selected things, but they're selected. Luckily, we're in professions that we can be offline.
They think that's interesting, Tom, because that's where you're going to see a lot of these huge induced impacts, which are the flows to the household. Because in a person-to-person gaming, you have, I imagine, much higher employment numbers and now unemployment numbers than you would for the online gaming. So even if we shift towards like a virtual gaming, and that is not my area of specialty in the future, it is likely to not employ the same number of people, and then we'll still see those losses through the induced effects to households.
The whole nature of it, I mean, those bars are going to be closed, other things, retail, it's a whole segment with that. And this gets where the rules are going to be hurt, and I think in agriculture, if they have poor internet, because that's where you're going to do buying and selling and all this kind of stuff. That is going to be, I feel sorry for my students, anybody's in White Pine County. There's some rule in Iowa, I think, Mike, it's interesting. They're putting school buses, making them hot spots so people can drive to them and download things. So the type of infrastructure you need for this type of work, if it's not there, you're in trouble. And if you're not trained for this work, and we kind of rapidly, all of us here rapidly kind of changed and started using this in a week. But if you don't do that kind of stuff, you're in trouble.
Or you're not able to.
Right.
Yes.
So speaking of the broadband issue and thinking back to our initial focus in our area of specialty on ag and the rurals and so forth, I do want to mention another important thing that happened last week was the stimulus bill. And there was inclusion in the stimulus bill of about $23 billion for agriculture set aside in that bill. I don't know a lot of the specifics. They're not reporting a lot of the specifics yet, but there's about 10 billion set aside specific for COVID-19 response funding for agricultural producers. They do list, livestock producers and commodity producers, but also specialty products, which I know in Nevada, there's, especially in Clark County and Washoe County, quite a few people who fall into that category. There's also 14 billion that'll go to the Commodity Credit Corporation, and then potentially funding another round of the, the market. Help me out here, guys.
The dairy programs and stuff.
Yeah, the dairy program.
The MFP.
MFP, yeah. Thank you. The marking. And then also included in the package, there is, I think, about 125 million
You take care.
set aside to improve broadband and telecommunication services in the rurals. Again, that's not my area of specialty, but I'm not sure how far that will go. I mean, it's something, but I'm not quite sure how far that will go.
But also in the rules, Malik, I don't know if you got my email that there's a thing in Wall Street today about the Navajos in New Mexico saying because of getting wiped out.
Yeah, well, there is also 10 billion set aside in that stimulus package for tribes. So the Indian Health Service and other coronavirus related impacts to tribal communities.
Just to clarify, Tom,
Yes.
the term that the Navajos were getting wiped out, I hope you meant financially and
They're
physically.
it's like in many rural areas, the hospitals are being, the governor of New Mexico is saying their hospital are being overrun. And
Just to clarify, you're not talking about the getting wiped out in terms of a death toll. You're talking about
this governor was kind of talking that way.
okay.
It's one of these things when you get, I guess it's person-to-person contact if you're close, and who knows where you get pockets. Even in rural areas, they don't have hospitals to. As we drive down the road, we're going to get wiped out by somebody's not looking at us pulling out. But that's a problem. So there are going to be interesting circumstances all through this whole thing.
Back to the question of industries that may be getting hit again. Tom, you've actually got an audience that is a captive audience there with you in the car with your wife, Kim, who had a career with Dieter. Has she, just out of curiosity, been looking at this stuff at all, even though I know she's retired, but does she have any thoughts on different industries?
Well,
sorry to put you on the line, Kim.
No, not on industries, just on unemployment, knowing that people can't get through to file their claims. I think so Dieter's supposedly adding staff to handle all the claims. So I think once people can actually get through to file their claims, you're going to see a lot more than what's predicted right now.
That's what they're saying. And the next month is going to be huge.
Or technology, in good times, Dieter's funding gets cut. So they were, their staffing was down.
Yes. And that it's hard for them to pivot. Well, as you know, a state government's hard to hire. And so when things are good, you lessen the employment. And then when this hits, it's hard for them to pivot back over. So there is that. And I've heard people talk about it, and that they think even though this was a 1,600% increase here in the U.S., I know it may be here in Nevada, it's going to be more so the next month.
Thanks, Kim. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Well, from a personal point of view, I'm very interested in Tesla. I mean, were they deemed essential and they're closing now?
I thought they were deemed essential, but
it's kind of like your liquor exam. Liquor stores are closed here in Nevada, but the marijuana is open. So this essential and unessential varies completely across the spectrum between different states, and that's where I think people want a coordinated national effort.
Is that because there's different regulations affecting the delivery and distribution of alcohol versus cannabis?
I have no idea. The other thing that's interesting in the Wall Streets too is what's going on in the Fed, because people are worried about inflation and stuff like that. So it's going to be an interesting everything's interconnected. Science interconnected with the economy. And Bob, if I get hard to hear because I'm in the car, just mute me if you would.
Okay.
Mute him anyway.
Well, we're about.
Take the video off.
We're about 20 minutes in. Are there any final thoughts that you want to add? Sort of the high-level points, information people can use this week to hopefully, you know, keep plugging away at their businesses, or at least make some, you know, alternate plans if they're getting hit pretty hard. So any final thoughts?
We're still just in a wait and see for, you know, we talked about consumption last week, 2/3 of GDP. If consumption of most things can, you know, remain not necessarily robust, but keep plugging along, then the economy will kind of keep plugging along, even though we're going to be having some losses. But if people become, start reducing their consumption of certain things beyond the ability to hoard, when that runs out, if people then begin to ration, that could have a big impact on the economy.
Okay.
And I would say to the ag producers in general, we know that they are steady through uptimes and downtimes, and they're just going to keep plugging along like they always do. And, you know, we're all better off for it. But they just, I would recommend that producers stay in touch with their FSA and rural development offices. They're going to be the ones that have the information about any kind of COVID-related relief or funding, the MFP programs, and so forth. So that's going to be their best source if they need a little bit of assistance getting through this tough time.
And Tom, any last thoughts here?
Completely fluid because things change so much. Think what happened in the last couple of weeks, because we don't have a lot of data. What this it's going to proceed. New York now has the highest. Now will it be in another county, and will it progress to other places, and what all will that do? So it's I see the trucking now. I just passed a alfalfa hay truck from Eureka, I know. So they're still doing it, but it's the prices of ag and a lot of the prices of natural resources. Gasoline has really gone down. It's a fluid moment. It's we end of April. When we come back, are we going to come back like we were? Well, not really. It's going to be a little different. So ag will still need for ag, but the national economy, everything's going to be a little different. What it's going to be, we'll have to. Those farms that can pivot are going to be the ones that can be successful.
Great. Well, thank you all. Appreciate the insights, and we'll try to check in next week as well and get a new video out to folks. And maybe we'll take some questions and comments from people that we can address for the next episode.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks,
You guys take
everyone.
care.
Okay.
Stay safe.
All right.
Stay healthy.
Yeah.
This is
You too.
Mobile Tom signing off.
All right. Bye-bye.